what's important to know is that there's about 6 million rental units in the state of California. Approximately 3 million of those rental units are in buildings that are between 1 and 5 units. And clearly, those particular landlords, we sort of call them mom and pops, which are really independent rental owners, they are probably most impacted than anybody. I mean, all landlords are going to be impacted, but if you've got a 4-unit building and 2 of your residents cannot pay the rent, that means 50% of your renters aren't going to be paying the rent, which if you have to make the mortgage payments, insurance payments, and the other expenses, that's very difficult, very, very tough.
And what options do those mom and pop landlords have? We've heard about these varying approaches to moratoriums on evictions, perhaps providing some relief to tenants. What about the people who own these buildings? What kind of recourse do they have if they're not able to make their mortgage payments?
Part of the challenge that the rental housing industry has, particularly for those smaller independent rental owners, are that there really isn't anything at this point in time. All of the federal programs really excluded those smaller independent rental owners. It's all based upon an IRS definition of that investment. And so there was no ability for them to access those federal funds, even when they were available. Additionally, there just is not any resources that are currently available for landlords. And I think what's important for everybody to understand is that your smaller landlords are very reflective of the general population. You have some landlords that are financially stable and they can probably weather the storm for a while, 2 to 4 months. Then you have a number of landlords who basically are sort of living almost paycheck to paycheck and mortgage payment to rent payments. So there's really not a whole lot that can be done other than they are trying to get to their banks to see if the banks will grant them some type of forbearance. But once again, that's problematic because the vast majority of those mortgages that are held by the smaller owners in particular, it's all based upon whether the bank wants to help them or not. There is nothing legal. There's no regulations that require the banks to grant forbearance or forgiveness on those mortgages.
And there has been some talk of mortgage forbearance where, for example, a property owner would be able to defer payments. Let's say they're not able to pay the mortgage for 3 or 4 months, then those payments would be then tacked on to the very end of the mortgage. It sounds like that might not be a possibility for everyone in this particular situation. I think people know what the narrative is here for tenants. There might be some moratorium on eviction, but especially at a certain point, if you keep not paying rent, you're not able to pay the rent, at some point the landlord will have the ability to evict their tenants. What happens to these mom and pop landlords when they can't pay the mortgage? How soon would they be looking at something like foreclosure?
There are 2 different types of foreclosures. One is a non-judicial foreclosure, which is the vast majority of the mortgages, which basically means you don't have to go to court to start a foreclosure procedure. There is about 120 days where there is a time where the owner has to make up those mortgage payments. If they don't, the banks can basically foreclose and literally put the property up for sale. And there's really no court interaction at that point in time. That's just because the mortgages specifically state that if you don't pay the mortgage, then the bank can basically sell the property out from underneath you. Yes, there's times that they have to give notice, but if you don't pay your mortgage, banks can pretty easily go after you. I do have to say, I do think a number of banks are trying to work with the owners to make this happen, but currently, there's no legal requirement that the banks do that.
No, and then in that case, the tenant is gone as well. We just have a few moments left here with you, Mr. Bannon, but some have said, look, and it's a word you used earlier, investment. For landlords, this is an investment. Sometimes you lose money on an investment. Your thoughts on that way of looking at it?
A number of your smaller independent rental owners, a lot of folks basically put their life savings into their property, and it is their retirement. Is it a gamble? Sure, it's a gamble. Everything is a gamble. I mean, that if you go and you work for somebody, you may get laid off, you